Guys, the first round of the Formula One season is come and gone, and boy, what a weekend it was. From start to finish, we had surprises up and down the grid, culminating it all on Sunday with one of the most wild season openers that I can remember. What's going on, guys? We are here to talk about the 2025 Formula One season opener, the Australian Grand Prix, and what a Grand Prix it was. We had everything from changeable conditions to rookies making mistakes, to experienced drivers making mistakes, to just all around insanity from start to finish. We're here to talk about every single aspect of it. It feels like this video could be an hour long, but unfortunately I need to keep it relatively short today. So we are going to try to do our best to sum up what we saw in Australia down under in week one. Let's go ahead. Let's kick things off with our quick hits. We'll then move into our weekend winners and losers. We'll wrap things up with our predictions, results, and then it's a quick turnaround. China is but a week away, so we have to get ready for that. But if you haven't already, subscribe down below. We have a lot of fun content planned for you in the coming months with Formula One, and we do a little bit of sim racing on this channel as well. If any of that interests you, go ahead, hit subscribe. Join this little community we have going. And as always, leave a rating down in the comment section below what rating you would give the Australian Grand Prix out of 10. I'm fascinated to know what you guys think. Let's go ahead, let's get this party started and get on our, I call it the quick hits, but I feel like there's so much to talk about here. Let's get this party started. We have to start with the big talking point of the Grand Prix on Sunday is the weather. Now, the weather was apparently about as 180 flip as you possibly could get going into a Grand Prix weekend. Leading up to Sunday, we had about scorching temperatures and really tough conditions on tires, leading into Sunday where it was apparently downpouring to the nth degree all the day leading up to the Grand Prix, including a shortened F3 race and a very heavy amounts of rain falling from the sky. That culminates leading up to the full race Grand Prix for Formula One, which we saw a full grid line up on the grid. A couple of cars in the pit lane with Ollie Bearman and Liam Lawson starting in the pits. Unfortunately, we had to see multiple formation laps because my first talking point is just how bad I feel for Isaac Hadjar. Man, he spun coming out of turn 2, just got on the wrong part of the track trying to get some temp into the tires, and it was just as simple as that. Before he had made it 1.5 turns into his Formula One career and just slid backwards into the wall, breaking his rear wing, and unfortunately he was out before the race even started. You could see how broken up he was as they were trying to clean up his car and he made his way back into the paddock. He was absolutely distraught, and I really feel for him. I mean, can you imagine being in that position? You sacrifice all of that to make it to Formula One. It's your first Grand Prix weekend. You've actually had some, looked pretty good, had some decent pace. I believe he qualified, what, 11th in this one? And you are put in a position to have a pretty decent car, and you just get on the wrong place at the wrong time on the formation lap and gets over before it even begins. You could tell how distraught he was. He was even comforted by Lewis Hamilton's father, Anthony, and you could just tell that he was absolutely just broken up to the max about this result, and you really do feel for him. Luckily for him, he is going to have a quick turnaround with China just a week away, but at the same time, it's like, man, that was tough to watch. I felt so bad. But that said, he wasn't the only one to not finish this race. We had 6 total DNFs from this race, including Isaac Hadjar. As we mentioned, Jack Doohan was lost on lap 1. We lost Gabriel Bortoleto, who I think actually had a suspension failure before sliding into the wall in DNFing from this one. We had Carlos Sainz have a very similar experience to Hadjar, spinning coming into the final corner, just getting a bit of a torque surge and crashing into the wall himself. And we had Fernando Alonso DNF in this one from just getting at the wrong place at the wrong time again, slippery conditions, just drops it at the worst possible moment, slides backwards into this one. And who am I forgetting? I'm forgetting someone. Of course, how could I forget? Liam Lawson also DNFs from this one. Unfortunate to say the least for a lot of the rookies. We only had 2 rookies complete this session, and it was Ollie Bearman, who had about the worst weekend I'd ever seen leading up to the Grand Prix on Sunday, and obviously Kimi Antonelli, which we'll get on here in a moment. But there's a lot of DNFs, a lot of sliding around, losing it at awkward positions, and just the slippery conditions really got a lot of people out, including most of the rookies. Now, for everyone who did finish the race, let's start at the front. Lando Norris converts his first pole to victory in 2025. It wasn't without a little bit of drama, but at the same time, we saw the McLaren be consistently quick in the dry leading up into qualifying, where they ended up putting a 1-2 on the rest of the grid by about 4 tenths plus. I think Lando was closer to 5 tenths. And Oscar, I think, was closer to 4 tenths over the rest of the field. So it's going to get very papaya colored over the course of the season if they continue to have that kind of pace. But going into the Grand Prix, it's wet. You never know what could happen. You saw Max Verstappen make a good push at the beginning, but it wasn't enough. Not even a dual spinning off towards the end of the race from McLaren could keep Lando from taking advantage of some poor strategy calls, we'll call it, from other teams to end up still remaining and taking his first win of the season. It wasn't without challenge though, as Max Verstappen was right on his tail for the final few laps, but he kept his cool head and crossed the line P1 to lead the championship for the first time in his career. And I believe I saw it was the first driver to lead the championship that was not Max Verstappen since the Spanish Grand Prix in 2022, which I believe was Charles Leclerc at the time. So the passing of the guard, who knows? Is it a good omen for the 2025 season? I think so. Speaking of McLaren, we have to talk about Oscar Piastri, who is running a very good weekend all the way up until just a handful of laps remain, where he and Lando both went off at this third to last corner. I believe turn 11 or 12 is that corner. Unfortunately, the conditions had just worsened. Everyone was on slicks. They went straight on through the gravel trap, through the grass, and the angle that Piastri had coming up to the second to final corner, he slid across into the grass and ended up stranded on the grass for a little bit of time. He did manage to recover and actually still finished P10 to get a point, but at the same time, it looked like he was potentially even challenging for the win at his home race, and unfortunately, it culminated in just absolute the worst feeling you could possibly have as a Formula One driver, where you're in reverse doing about 2 miles an hour trying to crawl your way out of the wet grass on slick tires just to get back and finish the race. I feel so bad for Oscar. He was running fantastically. He had some great pace over Lando at points. There was the controversial-ish moment about McLaren saying to hold position while they navigate back markers, when Oscar was very much, I think at that point, quicker than Lando. But at the same time, Lando ends up getting the win, Oscar ends up getting a point, and I think this McLaren battle is going to be one to watch all season long. So we mentioned Lando getting the win thanks to some poor strategy calls from other teams, and one of those, as we have to talk about it, is Ferrari. Lewis Hamilton's debut in the Scuderia Ferrari team. He actually ends up coming home P10. I got that wrong. Piastri did get by Hamilton, I believe, on the final lap of the race to finish P9. So Oscar does walk away with a couple of points, if I can retract my statements I just made. But Lewis comes home to finish P10, and Charles Leclerc comes home to finish, what was it, P7, 8, doesn't really matter. I think they're going to be feeling the effects of this one all week leading up to China, as they were at one point 2-3 on the grid, but unfortunately everyone else had pitted for inters when Ferrari had deemed themselves better suited to sticking with the slicks before ultimately pitting and just being at the back of the points paying positions. They were able to move forward slightly, but Lewis just ends up finishing right at the back of the points, and Charles not too far ahead from there. So it's a tough opening for Ferrari, who I think a lot of people were imagining might challenge McLaren at the front of the grid. Ultimately, it is what it is, but it's hard to look at the fact that Ferrari are now 7th in the constructor standings after the first weekend, when a team like Williams had an amazing finish and I think are 4th in the constructors. So tough scenes for Ferrari. I'm hoping that this is not indicative of what they're going to have going on the rest of this year. Obviously, Australia is a bit of a unique track with unique situations. Throw in the weather and it is what it is. But at the same time, it's hard to look at this and not feel extremely disappointed. Alright, I mentioned it, Alex Albon comes home to finish P4 in this one. Williams came into this season, I think, a bit of an unknown. You had the addition of Carlos Sainz, bringing a wealth of experience and talent to the driver lineup that they might not have seen with the dual lineup in quite a while. We were curious to see how Alex Albon would respond to the signing of Carlos Sainz, just because a lot of people, I think, over the offseason were looking at it going, Carlos Sainz is really going to be a good benchmark for Alex. And I think he responded about as well as I think you can, finishing P4 in the Williams on his first outing of 2025. Now, this did come at the hands of a Kimi Antonelli 5-second penalty for an unsafe release. But at the same time, he was right there with him and ended up getting the position that he basically had held a lot of this race already. And so, man, what a weekend from Williams. I'm sure they're going to be feeling that Carlos Sainz DNF pretty heavy. But that said, the car obviously has some pace, and it'll be interesting to see what they can do next time out in China. Speaking of Kimi Antonelli, let's go ahead and move on to Mercedes. We saw George Russell have about an anonymous a podium I think you could possibly have. Aside from a spin in practice, kind of trying to keep it out of the wall. We didn't really see a lot of George, I think, over the course of the weekend, including the race, which he just silently went about his way, had a solid qualifying, didn't make any major mistakes in the race. And when you look up at the end of the race, it's him there in P3, getting his first podium of the season as well. Add on the fact that his teammate went from P18 to P5 in his first race, obviously taking advantage of the pace of the Mercedes over some of these slower teams, and throw in the fact that he had some well-timed moves to move past some of the people ahead. Very, very impressive stuff from Kimi. Obviously, I think one of the more impressive drives that we've seen from a rookie in a very long time. He joins Ollie Behrman as being one of the only two rookies to finish the Grand Prix, and almost finished just behind his teammate who finished P3. So I don't know, I'm excited to see what Kimi Antonelli is going to bring to the table. If this is the kind of pace and skills that he's going to bring to the grid, I for one am more and more excited every day to see what he can do in another Grand Prix weekend, which thankfully will be coming up quite soon. Alright, we have to talk about the Nico Hülkenberg effect, because not only did Nico Hülkenberg come into the Haas F1 team the last couple of seasons and drive them forward in the standings thanks to some fantastic finishes in situations exactly like this, taking advantage of DNS, taking advantage of unique situations to come home and deliver positive results. Because not only did he finish in the points for Sauber, he finished by scoring more points in this one race to start this season than Sauber scored the entirety of last season, which took a couple of monumental incidents and moments to help that happen. And so Nico Hülkenberg just seems to be the king of stepping into teams with some slower-ish looking cars. Now, to say the least, Sauber did look relatively strong this weekend comparatively to last year, so I think the car is performing a little bit better than it did last season, but at the same time, a P7 in that Sauber probably deserves every bit of accolade that he could get this weekend. I don't think it's necessarily going to warrant, driver of the day, obviously, but at the same time, I don't think we can just chalk this one up as an outlier for Sauber, because we've seen Nico do this previously, and I think it's going to be something to watch all season long. And then last but not least, let's wrap this up at the back of the grid, the very, very, very back of the grid. That's right, I have to take a moment to talk about my beloved Haas F1 team, because oh my god, we're so in the mud, it hurts so bad. It hurts so bad just to see how bad we were. I copiumed to myself during preseason testing, saying that they were just doing pure long, race runs, full fuel loads, maximum amount of laps. We did not care about the over 1 lap pace, and we were just purely trying to gather as much data as possible. But then we get to practice 1, where we see Ollie Behrman crash out. His fault, but not necessarily performance related. We saw Ollie Behrman. Okay, hold on. Let's just cover the Ollie Behrman weekend before I continue on, because I typed this out to a friend last night when I was watching the race, and man, what a weekend leading up to. Crashes out of FP1, can't run in FP2, crashes out of FP3, gearbox failure in qualifying, starts from the pit lane because obviously couldn't set a time in qualifying. He is now, I believe, on his 3rd gearbox of his season allotment, as well as having to take a completely new set of ICE components, including the engine, the MGU H and K, and just everything about it. So I believe he's already down a vast majority of engine components and gearboxes, and it's just, wow, how does it get worse than that? leaving the first weekend. We saw, I believe it was last year, where Ferrari and Charles Leclerc lost a set of components on the first race, but Ollie somehow managed to take that and knock shit up a couple of degrees, which honestly is kind of the perfect antithesis to him being one of the only 2 rookies to actually finish the Grand Prix on Sunday. And while the performance was down literally in the mud, in the core depths of the earth mud, he did finish. So I guess in the grand scheme of things, he did finally get some laps, and hopefully, in some universe, Haas gathered some good data from this weekend and were able to translate it a bit to try and develop this car as quickly as possible, because boy, oh boy, was that about as underwhelming of a debut for a team as I could possibly remember. Even Esteban Ocon just had no pace the entire weekend. I believe both Haas cars were lapped by lap 30 in this one, and I was so far in the depths of my feels immediately this weekend that I could not believe that it could get any worse. Hopefully it doesn't. It's a quick turnaround for China. Man, I'm hoping that Australia was just a one-off. All right, let's move it along. I feel like I could have gone on with my quick hits for so much longer, but we got to keep this thing moving a little bit here and there. Let's go ahead. Let's talk about our weekend winners and losers. We'll start with our weekend winner. I feel like this one is pretty obvious. It has to be Lando Norris. To convert his opening weekend from a pole to a win must feel pretty good, especially last year where they had so many of these situations fall away from them. Lando delivered in every opportunity outside of sliding off on one of those restarts, but I'm surprised more people didn't at that point. And so he ended up doing exactly what he needed to do, kept his cool head, finished in first, and leads the championship after one round of 24 this season. I mean, he's like I mentioned in quick hits, he took advantage of some bad strategy calls from others and found himself back at the top, even though it looked like Ferrari was going to take a step forward, and McLaren, using that mistake, might not have been able to recover, but he quickly made his way back through the field and used that car's pace to his advantage and still finished first, even though he was being pushed by Max Verstappen. So congrats, Lando Norris, my first weekend winner of the season. Let's move quickly to my weekend loser, and I'm kind of keeping this one generally pretty vague, mainly because I feel like this race was so crazy it was hard to pick exactly one individual or team loser. So I'm going with the collective of all the rookies minus, I think, Kimi Antonelli, but at the same time, even Kimi had a tough qualifying, and so I think it was just a tough situation for all of the rookies. I mean, you had Hadjar DNF on the formation lap. You had a Doohan DNF on lap 1. Bortoleto and Lawson DNF at the end of the race. Antonelli survives, has a fantastic race, tough qualifying, but ends with a 5-second penalty, robbing him of a P4 on his debut. And then we have Ollie Behrman, and we already went through his string of bad lucks leading up to the Grand Prix itself, starting on his second engine and third gearbox, and finishing basically dead last of those who finished on track. So all of the rookies had a tough weekend, to say the least. And I don't think it would last forever. I think we're going to see some good things from these rookies if they get a good, solid weekend from start to finish. But at the same time, man, I think we all knew that going into the season with 6 rookies was going to have these moments. I don't think we expected it to come first race of the year. I do want to give a special mentioned weekend loser to Haas F1 team. I'm not going to go on another rant, but at the same time, boy, oh boy, I'm struggling with it already, and I posted this on Twitter and Threads and on my social medias, but I'm just praying that Haas confirm that we're just going to tank this year. If we're really going to be this bad, I'm praying that we just admit that we're tanking for CFD and wind tunnel hours for 2026, and I'll be happy. I'll be extremely disappointed after what we saw in 2024, but at the same time, at least that gives us some explanation for how we could go from competing and challenging for P6 in the Constructors to being a lap down, just over half a race distance away, only 3 or 4 months later. I need it, and I'll stop talking about it, I promise. All right, let's get to it. Our final section, our predictions results. We'll go over the predictions I made, and then we'll provide our first post-race weekend predictions standings as we head on to round 2. Let's kick it off. My pick for biggest positive surprise was Ferrari. I thought we were going to see an inspired performance from Ferrari coming into 2025. I think it looked like it was going to be semi-on as we ended through some practice sessions with Ferrari showing some pretty decent pace. but after a poor qualifying and a less than stellar finish in the Grand Prix, there was no way I could give myself points here. I mean, we saw just not a good weekend for Ferrari. We'll just leave it at that. We kind of covered it already. No points for me there. Moving on to my pick for biggest disappointment, I went with Kimi Antonelli. I think a kid with like that going and stepping straight into Mercedes, I think was going to set him up a bit for a bit of a disappointing weekend if he didn't get quite up to speed. Throw in the fact that it was going to be raining on Sunday. I think we had a situation which we could have seen Antonelli kind of struggle a little bit more than ultimately he did. I think I tentatively felt pretty good about this prediction. Not that I felt good about making these kind of predictions for drivers on qualifying, where he ended up getting knocked out in Q1, but he had a heck of a drive to close out on Sunday and finish in the top 5. So absolutely no way I could give myself a point for biggest disappointment there. Moving on to my qualifying predictions, I predicted a Max Verstappen P3, ding ding ding, a Charles Leclerc P2, ultimately ended up being Oscar Piastri, so no points for there. And then a Lando Norris pole position, taking 2 points from qualifying. One of my better jobs at qualifying. I feel like I'm never quite able to pick the vibes going into a weekend of qualifying. So I'll take 2 points there to get us on the board for the first time in 2025. That leads us into the race podium, which we're kind of back down to earth. I predicted a Charles Leclerc win, a Lando Norris P2, and a Lewis Hamilton P3. Obviously, the only one of those 3 to finish on the podium at all was Lando Norris, and he won the race. So a half point for me there. So I'm currently sitting at 2.5 points thanks to qualifying in my race podium predictions. And then we wrap things up with our one crazy prediction where I predicted that the qualifying top 3 would be separated by less than 1/10. And before the final runs by McLaren, that was actually on. I believe the gap from P1 to P3 before their final runs was 85 thousandths of a second. And so this was looking very on until McLaren decided to dunk half a second on the rest of the grid. So unfortunately, no points for me there either. I leave the weekend with 2.5 points. An okay weekend, but when you look around and see what we had scored by the community, I currently sit in last. Spoiler alert. So as we take a look at our first post-weekend standings, we currently have F1 Inferno leading the championship in the community so far with 5 points. One of the best weekends I think we could have or might have seen in our predictions championship to date. Followed up by British TTG with 4 points, Sentinel 40 with 3 points, and me bringing up the rear with 2.5 points. And guys, if you're interested in joining our community predictions championship, join us in the Discord, link down below. Leading up to every Grand Prix weekend, I make a call for these exact predictions, and we'll see who can get the most right leading up to the end of the season. Next week is going to be the addition of our first new prediction, our sprint winner, obviously with China being a sprint race weekend. And I think that leads us into the final question we have for the video is what is next in Formula One? They head to China in just a week. A quick turnaround. There's gonna have to be some short attention spans and some short memories for these drivers and these teams as they now have to turn around, shift their mindset to a sprint weekend, the first of 2025, and we head to China to race around the Shanghai International Circuit. Last year, it was a Verstappen win, Norris P2, and Sergio Perez P3, a rarity of last year as the season went on. But guys, who do we see on the podium this year? I have a feeling they might be papaya colored, maybe a little bit of Red Bull mixed in there as well. Although we could also see something surprising happen. It's going to be a short weekend for practice sessions, only one before leading up to sprint qualifying on Friday, and then Saturday being the sprint race and Grand Prix qualifying. It is going to be, the potential for drama is going to be high, and I for one can't wait to see it. Guys, that wraps up our race recap for the first round of 2024. One of 24 video pairings done already. I hope you guys enjoyed the Grand Prix weekend. I know I was so excited. Hosti did leave me a little disappointed leaving it, but at the same time, if this is going to be the kind of thing we get all season long with people battling in the top 5, I am all here for it. We'll be back in a few days for predictions for China. It's going to be a quick turnaround. And guys, I hope you're excited because I know I am. I thank you all so much for making it this far into the video. If you did, leave a like rating. It really helps me out with the algorithm on YouTube. We're trying to grow this little community one step at a time. But guys, we'll be back in a couple of days with some more Formula One action, and I'll see you in the next one.